innovations and strategies that can help in increasing substantial investments through our collaborative efforts to drive lasting and sustainable impact. While the broader financial landscape presents its own sets of challenges, notably a gap for equity funding, which is critical in leveraging the additional debt funding, our discussion today will be focused and centered around structuring the deployment of debt. We have a great set of panelists with us today that bring a wealth of experience and insights from structured debt facilities, the blended finance, and including different stakeholders. I'd like to highlight that the session will focus on funding for solar home systems, green mini-grids, C&I, and smaller scale infrastructure, rather than the large infrastructure projects. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have with us Robert Voskuilen, who is Manager Energy at FMO. He brings a wealth of experience in financial structuring for renewable energy projects, including over a decade with FMO. Robert has been involved from the early days in supporting the development of FMO's energy investment strategy, which offers a full range of financing solutions for the sector. We have Nico Tyabji, who is Director of Origination and Strategic Partnership at Mirova SunFunder. Mirova SunFunder is a specialized fund manager which has closed over 300 million in debt funding to more than 60 companies working in clean energy and climate solutions in emerging markets, with a strong focus on Africa. Mirova SunFunder is scaling up its clean energy and climate investments, including through its gigaton strategy, which is looking to deploy an additional 500 million to small and medium enterprises. We have Axel de Viel, Director, Strategy and Innovation at ADA. ADA is an NGO focused on inclusive and sustainable finance. Its approach is focused on structuring value change and supporting local partners to improve their business and extend their client base. And ADA has been collaborating with microfinance institutions and is as well a fund advisor to develop dedicated loan products to the sector. At the same time, ADA also raises awareness amongst communities to boost the demand and make them aware of the benefits of solar energy. Our fourth panelist of today is Dele Fasimo, who is Divisional Head at Sterling Bank, a full-service national commercial bank in Nigeria, providing financial services to individuals, small businesses, and large corporations. He has been heading the energy division and is involved in the bank's transition to do more in supporting impactful and sustainable businesses, including in the renewable energy space. I'm excited to have Dele with us today to provide a perspective from a commercial bank. And following these introductions, we have a set of several questions that we'd like to go through, and I'm looking forward to some insightful and engaging discussions. And at the end, we will have some time for questions from the audience as well. All right, with that, I'd like to kick it off with some questions. And Robert, I'd like to start with you. Can you provide some insights in FMO's approach to structuring and deploying debt financing? And in particular, how you tailor your financial solutions to meet the diverse needs of the sector?
Thanks, Elsbeth, for the introductions. Yeah, I think it has been now some 12, 13 years that FMO is quite involved in financing DRE projects. And then I'm talking about mostly the somewhat smaller end of the spectrum, but it does include also C&I, small-scale C&I. Since then, we've financed over 300 million, over 40 projects, more or less. And that's both direct and indirect. And that is also at sort of part of our strategy. As a DFI, we cannot provide, let's say, the very small tickets. So whenever that is needed, we usually take an approach where we either co-create a fund, a dedicated fund ourselves, which we have done, for example, with the Energy Entrepreneurs Growth Fund that's managed by Triple Jump. And there are other examples as well. Or we go directly if the tickets are slightly larger. I think in in the DRE space, what you do need is some form of blending. And I think it's still needed, and especially when you look at mini-grids, it's also not, it's actually good. I mean, looking at all the energy networks worldwide, most of them were built with using government funds. So on the CapEx side, it's actually okay, as long as they can be, let's say, profitably run from an operational point of view. In terms of our structuring capabilities, we have different pockets of funding that we can touch. That ranges from our own balance sheet for the somewhat larger and maybe better credit quality deals to using government funds, dedicated government fund programs that we manage, with which we can take more risk and also are a bit more flexible in terms of products that we offer. So the products range from equity, venture equity, to mezzanine, subordinated debt, to senior loans. We look at solar home systems, mini-grids, C&I space. We are actually in the process of securing additional blended finance from the European Commission, as we have joined forces with the ADVIS in a program called Jeffrey, which is a EFSD Plus program, and that will also be partly geared towards promoting and scaling up the DRE projects in sub-Saharan Africa. Very important for us is to be able to, let's say, have a view about the scalability of projects. So even when we start small, as long as it is scalable, then yeah, you know that even if you start small, that you can really grow it. You can have the impact which goes along with the scaling, and also we can then also provide, and other DFIs can provide other larger ticket financings later on. Local currency is also something which is extremely important, and is actually something that we are also able to offer, either from our own book, if it is funded from the government funds programs that we have, or through TCX, which is another vehicle that we helped setting up back in the day. Let me stop there.
Great, thank you, Robert. Nico, over to you. What role does Mirova SunFunder play in providing debt capital, and maybe also some of the key lessons learned to date? Yeah, that we can learn from.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks to RA and the organisers for the invitation. So Mirova SunFunder is an amalgamation of Mirova, which is a French sustainable investor that's primarily invested in fixed income and listed equities, all dedicated to impact and sustainability, but with about 10% of assets in private investments, primarily in renewable energy projects in Europe. SunFunder was a early stage startup fund manager dedicated to the off-grid sector about 10 years ago. And SunFunder became part of Mirova about 2 years ago, which was really a sign of the scale that at SunFunder we believe was required and possible in this sector, and the intent of Mirova as a commercial impact fund manager to expand its presence in emerging markets, notably Africa and energy access. So I guess the first thing I'll say is I think the part of our journey has really been from proving out the viability and scalability of the sector from a commercial perspective. And the acquisition by Mirova, I think, is part of that, and a validation for the work that we're all trying to do together here. Where we are now is providing actually not dissimilar senior debt products to some of the DFIs and some of our peer impact investors. So we likewise work in the off-grid, mini-grid, small C&I, telco, ESCO sectors. And indeed, I think we've partnered on multiple transactions together, even recently with Robert's team on a telco ESCO transaction and an SHS transaction. So very much a sector of partnerships. The other way in which we across the sector is being a blended finance fund manager ourselves. So we're currently investing out of a $300 million vehicle that you mentioned, Elsbeth, the Mirova Gigaton Fund. In the past, we've worked with the likes of FMO in previous funds, and I found it really interesting in the opening panel this morning that blended finance means a lot of kind of government and private debt or impact debt, whereas for us it's very much within a fund structure. How do you de-risk and provide the kind of Gigaton Fund. We have a portfolio guarantee from CEDA, which is fundamentally important to the overall risk-return profile and making it a kind of bankable product for its investors. Some of the lessons there is actually, yes, it's not enough to the kind of impact goals that we have, and we're working towards SDG 7. But if you look at the investment, yes, a lot of that. It's relative level. I think where scale shouldn't on the debt side. What's been for us? It's been very it's making and that's something certain sit here, have that experience, $5 million reality, long-term economic proposition. And I think in the end, it's kind of and I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Nico. Well, this I was like, working partners, readiness. Tell us more about fine. Some
yeah, thank you. We have been active. Fine. And we need that in the same, notice, and so we need that value chain, and the idea is to say we have small players improve the business a good sustainable and I would also respond. There was a lot of and I see why even if as more there are many players, a lot of sports and I think it's also important to define what is small we start and we know that we invest the future we need to start another mention is for the if you have around if you are a lot of it's also top real and if you just try to and this is and they are fine. Actually, what happens to develop sufficient power and the idea is to stop saying rather combine initial and other
Great, thank you so much. Over to introduce Sterling Bank and its role in mobilizing and deploying debt funding for the DRE projects in Nigeria, and maybe also some of the opportunities you see, but also some of the challenges you face in this endeavor, and what strategies do you believe could help commercial banks like Sterling to deploy more funding?
Thank you very much, Elsbeth. Thank you very much. We have 5 specialized sectors of interest to Sterling, which we refer to as the heart of Sterling. We're focused on healthcare, we're focused on education, agriculture, renewable energy, and transport. The reason I decided to mention that is for the audience and every participant to recognize that we are not in this space by accident. We're here by deliberate strategic choice to make impact and to enable the key sectors that enable development. Now, having said that, when we started out to be very deliberate about intervening within the renewable energy space, one thing that we originally noticed was that there wasn't much of what we can call a market, whether a market for financing or even a market for reliable products. So what I'm trying to highlight is, as we meet each of the challenges along the journey, what we have done as an institution to try to cure or provide some market-leading solutions for those challenges. So we realized that there was not much of a marketplace, and then we set out to do a lot of market development activities. And having done that, we then realized that within the market space itself, there were two major fundamental challenges. And these included the problem with trust and the problem with financing, which a lot of people generally recognize that financing remains, or used to be a much more difficult problem than it is today. How do we mean trust being a problem? Trust being a problem because within the renewable energy space, particularly for small size and household type equipment, the general notion or question that people would ask was whether the renewable energy equipment available, SHS for example, was strong enough to provide the kind of power that is required for small businesses. People would typically ask questions as to whether this can power air conditioners or small size manufacturing SME type equipment. And in addition to that was that because historically people had brought in substandard products into the marketplace that really did a lot of damage to the trust value within the system. So we tried to solve for that by assembling a long list of developers and technical partners in order to create an ecosystem of reliable suppliers and vendors of equipment. They went through what we considered a stringent pre-qualification criteria, and then we went further to create a digital marketplace where they could actually list the available products, and right there we're solving for the two problems that I just highlighted, which is a problem of trust and a problem of financing by providing direct financing to consumers and end users of those products. And moving away from that, we then started into active participation with different government agencies around all the financing tools and the instruments that we discussed earlier today. So talking about blended financing, which is ability to mobilize public sector financing with private sector financing as well. Dating back to some years ago, I think about the 3 CEOs at the DRE, for example, some of their earliest initiatives like the Energizing Economies Initiative, where pre-COVID, we set out to work with them to power a sizable number of market locations and clusters. The plan then was to do about 22,000 market clusters, and we started out by providing blended financing support to funding available from the federal government through the Rural Electrification Agency. Of course, at that time, we went into some of those markets, then COVID happened, right? So again, COVID was a major setback. However, we've tried to continue to move forward with some of those projects. Now, moving away from mini-grids and some of the government-led intervention programs, we've now taken it a step further by working with developers who have bankable power purchase agreements that are bilateral, right? Because that really helps develop and strengthen the bankability of projects. So when we see such, we work with them with project development, with negotiating bankable PPAs, where possible, providing some ring around with a credit backstop to ensure that cash flows are generally more reliable. What we've seen in that space as a challenge is that we would really like that project developers do a lot more when it comes to developing projects that are much more bankable, building right governance around their projects, building projects that are first and foremost more independently commercially viable, but not trying to build projects that heavily depend on subsidies alone to be bankable, because we've seen that that really remains a challenge, because once those subsidies are either withdrawn or don't come through, then it becomes difficult for a private sector commercial financier, for example, to provide financing that's required. The other thing that I would like to mention before I hand back over to you is the weak local capacity when it comes to productive activity. because a lot of the components are been largely imported, but we've gone beyond that by supporting local assembly plants, those who actually assemble solar panels locally here in Lagos, because we know that that really remains one of the key elements to further strengthening the sector and expanding it for access to more financing. I'm sure I'll be happy to share more thoughts as we move along. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Delle. So we're going to hand over to, or we're going to go now to some discussions with the panelists. And I'd like to start. So on the one hand, we hear there is debt funding available, and we hear solutions offered by all of you, local currency funding. We hear blended finance. I mean, there's ecosystem building. So there's a lot happening. On the other hand, we saw a reduction in the deployment, or in the debt funding deployed last year. Some challenges came by: smaller tickets, scalability, profitability, bankable opportunities. So what is it that we need to enable the scale-up of that funding, and maybe then not just the availability, but also the utilization? So yeah, I'm opening it up to all of you, but yeah, keen to hear how can we then better collaborate together, or what do we need to do different to scale these businesses and to do more? Thank you, Delle. Credit enhancement guarantees to support and take away some of the risk and help you support to deploy the debt funding. Any other strategies or innovations or developments that can help us?
I mean, it made me thinking about the topic of investment readiness that we mention often, to say, I mean, we are ready to fund. The problem is to find a pipeline that is ready to get investments. And often the answer to that is, okay, we need TA to train, to coach, and to the potential investee. Yeah, that's one thing. But another way to do, or a complementary way to do, is learning by doing. And then we need to start an investment. If you need a year and a half for an investee to be trained, and et cetera, in order to get access to funding. I mean, he's probably dead by that time. And in order to start an operation, we need to start small, and we need to collaborate. We need to combine forces, and that's definitely to not just to consider a debt, but also to combine forces with other players. And this morning it was said, yeah, we need to, we can start small as soon and help the investees or potential investees to scale up. I say, okay, but the funder, they are funder who have a business model that is able to fund small players. And the idea is, okay, how could we link that kind of player with other players in the environment? And especially local banks are, for me, wonderful players to have in the loop, because through local banks, you can solve the local currency issue. You can, and if you come from abroad, you can bring a guarantee that makes value for them. So that's an example of combining a local player from the market and another player with another profile and another risk profile. So the idea is to find ways to link these different initiatives to start it.
Maybe if I can also respond. Yes, very often you start with small projects and then we talk about scalability. But I think what is really important is that from the start, the sort of outlook for the investor that's going to, let's say, promote mini-grids should be large. So the scale from the start should be large in potential, and that also links into how concessions are being organized. It also links into an integrated approach also from the government to really push economic development in the areas, in the rural or semi-rural areas where these mini-grids are going to be rolled out, because that will actually contribute to the success. Productive use was mentioned before, building ecosystems, what Alex mentioned. It's all about that, but I think you can start small, and usually you do start small, but it has to have the potential to really grow, and not in a fragmented way, but in a consolidated way. So I think also now you have, and that's logical probably, but there's so many developers out there that all do their utmost to develop projects. But what you really, if you really want to make a difference here in this sort of segment, then you need large players that target these markets. And there are a few, of course. We've heard about a few this morning, but I think that will definitely, or that can at least make a change.
And if I could just add on to the investment readiness theme, because that's key for us as well. And indeed, that fundamental bottleneck being the pipeline of bankable projects. And then that whole question of what does bankability mean? One thing is the disconnect between the TA that is being provided, because there is support and there are grants that go out, and the disconnect between that and
fast repaid. So the grants come in as the projects are being constructed and the connections are realized. However, what the local companies really lack, as the market grows and there is more potential, the lack of equity. So they have equity, but not enough. Now, the way that I see that can be bridged is by also providing mezzanine finance. And unfortunately, that in spite of all the de-risked aspects of those projects, like the grants and the ring-fence portfolio and risk spreading of many different mini-grids, raising the mezzanine finance is still a bridge too far. And I would like to invite my colleague financiers from the past to consider, hey, can we do a bit more than just a very short senior debt that is repaid in maybe 2 years or even less, if they are lucky, and bring some junior finance to the table with a slightly longer tenor. Okay, it has been a bit long story, but I hope it helps a bit.
Thank you so much. Axel, did you want to respond to that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just to give you one example of what you just said, we recently made junior debt for DFC, allowing an entity set up a digital company for education to access a senior debt from, we provide the junior debt to access senior debt of DFC. It was more than a year than the investee was looking for the junior debt. And we provide just a small amount, 600,000, they get access to 3 million. They already have 17 million approved. So, and we were the first junior debt provider. And I definitely, in line with you, I mean, public money should be used to that more than senior debt. But what is also important, and we never mention that, is having a long-term vision. We know that energy demand, the market is growing. The market will grow for the coming 15 years. The junior debt we provided is at least 7 years, up to 10, which is, I mean, comfortable for the big DFC. But I think it's really important to also enter into a longer-term approach, especially for junior debt, and allowing senior debt to be shorter term and more available.
I can only agree with everything everyone said. We have this problem all the time with the pipeline we look at. And I think it's a measure of the scale of the problem, of how the lengths that developers are having to go to kind of reimagine equity. But maybe I pass to my DFI colleague to comment on the role of DFIs in that kind of structure.
No, I mean, I agree. But yeah, it all depends on the availability of funds. Indeed, you see more, if a DFI has access to more concessional funding, then they probably play that game, but still not enough. So that should grow.
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with what other colleagues have said, and the narrative you shared with us shows real life practical experience within the local market, and it's very correct. Because if you look at it strictly from the perspective of a commercial bank, for example, typically you would like to see some presence of some equity type funding available in a project, right? For different reasons, so it's important that a lot more of, whether it's mezzanine or, whatever form of permanent capital as well is provided. Again, this is, I think, from the standpoint of even being able to catalyze senior debt provisions is very important, so I think it's a fair point that all lenders, or all financiers, I should say, should try and do a lot more about. We've tried to do a bit of that within what's allowable for us as a commercial bank, and we see that it really enables, is a big boost to being able to attract other types of financing for projects. So I do agree with the notion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Benjamin.
Good morning. Benjamin Koning from the Settler Fund, ASBB. Yes, I completely agree, being from the Settler Fund, the importance of, thank you, the importance of blending in concessional finance in a mezzanine tranche or a junior tranche. But the reality is often these deals are relatively small, and so therefore the transaction costs of doing so and diligencing that deal on an individual basis is prohibitive and time consuming. How do we do it in the scale and the speed that is required?
Yeah, I can start. Again, fair point. Sometimes it can be more attractive if you are dealing with a company that has a portfolio of projects, in which case the scale is already from the ground up. And then even if all the projects are not executed at the same time, you have a line of sight to a number of projects within the pipeline. And you know that there are certain costs, transaction costs that can be sunk and can be spread over, the subsequent projects to be executed. So I think it's an important point that you've made. Small sizes can make things a lot more difficult and expensive. However, if you're dealing with so we try to encourage some of the developers we work with to try to build a portfolio, a pipeline of projects such that becomes less restrictive when it comes to project assessment costs, legal costs, and other things that you are highlighting there. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what Della was saying. So on a case-by-case basis, then we can do those small deals. But yeah, we are as an organization not really organized to do that, just as AFDB is for that matter. So our approach is when the market is still, let's say, in a more nascent sort of situation, then we route to the market through, well, indirectly, so through funds, investment funds that are much more agile than we are. And with that, we can, yeah, you can actually deploy larger tickets in a fragmented way, however, to the market. With the aim, of course, that the market grows and develops, and that at the end of the day, that we can come in with larger tickets.
Say, aggregation is a bit the mot du jour, and there are a lot of initiatives. Our team at IFS actually developed a mini grid aggregator concept. It's not something that our funds have the appropriate funding for, but it's something we'd love to work on with others as well. And actually, generally, aggregation as a topic, I think, is growing. There's also calls for this for pay-go receivables for smaller distributors. We've also been looking at how you monetize the carbon, but other environmental attributes of smaller projects, and have a kind of standalone aggregator facility.
And I think that's a good point, because we're talking about lack of equity, but by taking some of those receivables off balance sheet might also really help in reducing that demand and the continued need for raising equity and more debt. Yes, go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Uchenna Baru. I lead an infrastructure fund here in Nigeria, and I'll speak through the lens of our experience investing in mini grids. We haven't done any CNI yet. Our mini grid portfolio, maybe about 2.5 megawatts. It was quite a journey to be able to close the deals that have been closed. And you would find that the challenge is scale. Similar to the conversations we've had so far, you do not want to dispense too much time trying to close a number of micro deals. So that is the challenge. The second big challenge, and this is perhaps as big, is that the players in the market cannot absorb the debt into the vehicles that they're trying to take that debt into. So that is reality. The question then is, how do we take the market from where it is to where we want it to go? And so perhaps two very different ways of approaching it that I'd like to suggest. One is this idea of aggregation of mini grids. We are doing something along those lines here in Nigeria through the NEP, now known as the DRE program. Through that program, 100 mini grids had been built, just because that program took a catalytic approach and said, look, we'll start with the smallest systems. You can do a 10 megawatt, a 5 megawatt system. Here is a pathway. One of the things that program did was it created a template such that if you were trying to get on board, you just really had to follow the process. And it means that for the deal team, you don't necessarily need a deal team that is unpacking every single investment. Instead, you just need a team that is checking that they have followed the process. So the idea of aggregation, I think, is hugely important. The second major thing is where we are sitting now, and just before my colleague and I were having a conversation with the sponsor, we've been talking with about 12 months now. He wants to do CNI. He needs to do a proof of concept, and it needs to run for 3 months before he can achieve the scale that we'd invest in. So the question is, where is he going to find that capital? The capital he's looking for is 250K, Naira equivalent. And so we said to him, go, get, and we mentioned a particular investor, get them to give you a convertible debt. At the end of the proof of concept, we will refinance them out and also give you the expansion capital. What that says is there's a bunch of guys who need that convertible debt when they're still early, when they can't take capital from people like us. It's one major area that interventions can target. The last thing, and I did say it too, so my apologies. The last thing is how we use TA. The process for accessing TA almost approaches TA very identical to actually investing in a deal. And so the effort of screening, selecting, and then onboarding a project or a bunch of projects for TA is quite rigorous. I'm not asking us to not do the due diligence. I'm saying, how do we simplify TA such that rather than prioritize deals based on their potential value, we are looking at volume? Because I'm a huge football fan. I believe in shots on goal. As many shots on goal as you have increases your likelihood of success. So how do we repurpose TA such that TA is almost on a rolling wave application basis? You can access it quickly, and it's translating to the value to a larger pool of projects, and it reduces the burden on the grant officers who are having to approve or review those applications. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any reflections on what was said? Or you agree?
Be one brief reflection, but actually I agree. You need flexible products. You touched upon the convertible debt or convertible instruments that start out as maybe a contribution that may flow back, may not flow back, and then only once there's success, it gets converted. And there's not so much of that in the market, to be honest. We have a little bit, but not much. And I think the market could do with more, because that would actually help projects being developed. And it also ties in, to some extent at least, to the remark that Janos made about the need for more mezzanine or catalytic funding, actually.
Thank you so much.
Just to make one practical proposal based on that and on what has been said, is why don't we try to share among a community of practice that might be led by Ari, to share practical deals or experience of people setting up less than 1 million deals with mini-grids or in that environment, just to learn and to know, okay, how is it possible to make it? And what has been the combination of players? And anyway, we know that alone, nobody wants to really focus on that segment. But we know that building that segment is building the pipeline of future investments. And so just a practical suggestion to create that community of practice to share these examples of deals.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Axel. I think, okay, one final question before we close the session.
Afternoon, everybody. John Oko, AMDA, African Mini-Grid Developers Association. I just have a comment on the subsidy issue that we talk about in mini-grids. If you compare IPPs and mini-grids, for example, you'll find that the grid-connected projects usually do not have the same, risk profile as mini-grids. One, because they don't have, mini-grids don't have PPAs, power purchase agreements, and then, electricity supplied by the government has a lot of subsidy involved in it already. So that you find that a private developer in the mini-grid sector will probably at the end produce power at about 23 cents. I'm just taking a rough figure in my head. And as compared to 7 cents from the public sector side, which is heavily subsidized already. So from my perspective, I think that subsidy is something that is there to stay, and we have to accept that subsidy must be part of the mini-grid projects. And how do we then create a sustainable subsidized program for mini-grids and say that these guys, you're asking for the impossible. You can't ask somebody to be profitable without subsidy and producing at 23 cents.
Well, thank you. That's on that point alone, I think we can have a separate full-day panel. Because the question of subsidy within the general electricity market itself, it's something that can be hotly debated in terms of the sustainability of it. And quite frankly, you're right, because I think I was making that point earlier. And my view is that that should be something that happens at the initial phase of the takeoff of the market. Because commercial and financial sustainability requires that the projects themselves should be able to stand without subsidies. Over time, and I think I've made this point earlier in some other, roundtable conversation like this in Abuja, and I almost got thrown out of the room. That's why I said it's a hotly debatable issue, right? Yes, because of the alternative on the grid power supply and the tariff that is heavily subsidized, it poses a challenge to these sort of projects that we're discussing today. But I think that what we've seen over the last couple of years with the subsidy on petroleum products, for example, gradually leaving, subsidy on grid power itself gradually being withdrawn, also enhances the conversation around the private sector projects like for mini grids. So as long as the subsidies exist on the alternatives, of course it impacts this and affects the commercial viability of it. That enhances the argument you have made. But the question is, what then happens when or if the subsidy on grid power is finally and totally removed? Right? Will this same argument still be advanced? And I guess the answer is no. So can we begin to build projects today, right, that can, at least on a potential basis, stand, right? And I think that's where tools like the productive use equipment, creating and energizing demand within the local community in order that there is, cash flow for each project becomes relevant, right? We can't possibly exhaust the conversation on that point, but these are just the thoughts that I have, that to the extent that we need to catalyze the industry or the market, yes, we should employ some sort of subsidized funding, which I think is where there's been so much conversation around either catalytic funding or blended financing today, is essentially to bring down the cost so that the end user can take benefit from it in terms of lower tariffs. But I think that we should put some stop date to that and not make it a permanent feature of the market. Thank you.
You want to come in? Or?
Two very quick points to not keep people from lunch too long.
Yes.
One, I think, is reclaiming the narrative around subsidy for mini-grids. As Robert said, it's a good thing. This is public investment in vital infrastructure. The second is that I believe AMDA a few years ago came up with a series of principles around how to design subsidy and also to make it more competitive over time. And so this is an industry-level coordination effort that AMDA and IRA have a great job to do in.
Thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of our session. I would like to provide a massive thanks to our panelists today for sharing sharing your insights, your experience, and thoughts on that funding. Thanks for the audience as well for being with us here today and for your engagement and questions. I think we need to continue these conversations, not just on the stage here, but the rest of the conference and beyond. Yes, there is funding available, but we need to do more to aggregate smaller tickets to see where mezzanine finance or catalytic finance can come in or blended finance can come in to deploy that funding and really work together to bring those different pools of instruments together to provide more funding to the sector. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, panelists. We're heading to lunch right now. I've been told to instruct everyone there's 2 sets of lanyards, and depending on the color of your badge,